have to have everything a real home has, only 1/10 of the scale? I mean, how do you define what an ADU is?
Why would a basement apartment be considered accessory? It seems like that's part of the natural house, right? Accessory to me seems additional, right? This is something that's not attached to my house, right? I mean, if it's in my basement, as long as they're not abusing anything and they're not parking on the street in the middle of the winter, is it really anybody else's business who's living in my basement?
They have a separate.
Right.
Well, yeah, it comes down to the physical construction. If you physically disconnect or wall off your basement to the main
Then
level,
it becomes a duplex.
then it's a duplex type situation. So,
Well, and from a life safety standpoint too, if you're going on a fire and you've got it closed off, so you've got different entrances and you're not able to access the basement from the main level and you don't know this, that can become even a firefighter safety issue. And that's, so I mean,
And, sorry, but last year when we, maybe a year's half ago, when we had the general plan committee formed, I brought this up as part of the moderate income housing plan, and that was the most, without a doubt, most polarizing issue with that group. Because half of them said, no, I bought a single family home, it should stay single family, that's, the city needs to protect that. And then another person that lives in the same neighborhood says, well, I've got a big house. I'd love to be able to turn part of my house into a rental unit. And so, it's all over the place. And so I think that's where the difficulty is trying to plant this into the existing city, because it really is very polarizing. So I wouldn't expect to do this without a lot of public meetings, a lot of open houses, and really see what the concerns are over and above what's discussed tonight, because parking and safety concerns are the two biggest issues.
and one of the things I've noticed from even attending to a lot of the city council meetings, a lot of the pressure for these ADUs are coming from outside the city, not even inside the city. And that kind of concerns me a little bit too, because it should be more of a city issue.
What do you mean
not
by
a-
that?
I mean, some of the people come to speak for it don't live anywhere near the city. They are speaking for it just as a general concept, and I kind of get that, but I know that can sway decision-making. So, anyway.
So in the interest of time, we've spent 14 minutes on this one. It sounds like there's still plenty of conversation left to be had, so I would, Scott, what are next steps on this one? Put together a plan to start with the definitions.
Yep.
Once we get a defined, start conversation with the community as to what their vision is, trying to get maybe an open house.
absolutely. We'll work with Tawny and Outreach, and this was good. Ownership sounds good, or sounds like it's an issue. We've got to address the infrastructure, the parking.
Personally, I'd just like to see it addressed on what the problems are that may be created and tackle the problems, because the problems may exist outside of ADUs as well. So outlaw the parking issues, outlaw the code issues with the electrical. The guy's got a shack in the backyard with a hanger sticking up to the power wire, like you see in third world countries. Address those issues independently of ADUs, and then let's boil it down to what's left. And now what do we need? What's left that's going to be common among all ADUs, and define that and see what we need to allow there. But problems I think that can exist outside of ADUs should not be tackled in an ADU ordinance just because an ADU can also cause that. Right? It's like, you know what I mean? So anyway.
I want to emphasize what Zach said, because all too often we find that we each have a different perspective. I mean, when we talk about, we're not even really sure that everyone has the same idea of what these are. When we jump ahead to say, well, this is the solution in my mind, everybody else has seen things differently, and we just kind of fall apart, and there's a lot of disagreement and sometimes contention there. But if we start with, like Zach said, okay, well, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and make sure we understand and we're all on board with these are the issues that we're looking to address, I think it'll be a whole lot easier as we look for solutions.
I would also echo what Kayleen said about making this a bit more citywide applicable.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just restricting it to specific zones. everybody in the city, if they meet the criteria that we set, should be allowed to add this, because this is an impact on a state level for affordable housing, right? And we want our people to live close to us. We don't want them to have to leave the state or the area, so I think everything's right with making sure this gets citywide applicability.
All right. Very good feedback, thank you. I think that the biggest question I have for this group tonight is kind of centered around what I heard from the council's retreat this past Friday. I heard a lot of comments regarding we need to update our plans. I would like to know what that means. We have our comprehensive general plan, which includes everything from sustainability, moderate income housing, our parks and open lands plan, transportation master plan, our future land use map, and I can go on and on, economic development. There's a lot of elements to our comprehensive general plan that we could do. It was last updated top to bottom in 2012. Over the years, the city has updated various elements within that comprehensive plan.
Like, for example, the parks plan is just being updated right now.
Exactly.
Well, the housing ratio was changed from 83-17 or whatever it was originally to 77-23.
Right, those adjustments. So I would just like to get your thoughts on what you mean by updating the plan.
When was the last general plan update?
Well,
8 years ago.
the whole top to bottom update was in 2012. But since that time, we've updated various elements within the general plan. Our moderate income housing plan's been updated to comply with state law. Our parks and trails master plan has just been updated. Our transportation master plan has been amended since 2012.
So I'll jump in real quick. I think we bring up the plans on occasion as needed, but I don't think we really have a focus on those plans. And in my mind, that's really what I'd like to see. I'd like to see at the start of each new term, whether it's the start of the year for new planning commissioners or the start of a new term for new city council members, we have one meeting where we spend maybe half hour to say, these are the different plans and this is how they connect, kind of give a brief overview. And then halfway through the year, maybe have a check-in saying, these are how we're doing. I'd like to see an update to the request for council action to show how things tie back to the plan. Right now, we only really have that for zoning change requests, where it's just a short little question that says, is this consistent with the general plan? So we kind of reference it, but I don't think most people here have actually gone through every plan that's out there and really know everything that we have. We get folks that are new to planning commission and new to the city council that say, hey, do we have a plan for this? Do we have a plan for that? I mean, we've got a plan for streetlights, but how long has it been since we looked at that? We started a project to swap out and do the LED lights, but we still need to get those from Rocky Mountain Power and UDOT, but we don't really, we haven't been a plan-centric city for a very, very long time. We've waited till somebody's brought something, then we've tried to be reactive to that. And I'm not plagiarizing, but basically plagiarizing what Councilmember Whitelock has said repeatedly. I should really let you talk on this one.
For me, Scott, of the plans, the one that causes me the most angst is the future land use plan, because if it's a good plan, I shouldn't be asked to change it every other meeting. And that bothers me that I'm asked to change it so frequently, because then it's not a plan. If I'm not following it at all and I'm constantly just changing it, I think that's hard for existing residents to understand. That's hard for me to decide. It's like, well, shoot.
But we don't live in a constant world, it's static, things change all the time.
That's why I think this plan needs to be updated.
It definitely needs to be updated, but we have to respond to the market changes as well. We may be in a 2008 or, 2000, I don't know.
And I get that,
Yeah.
but that's why when I brought up plans, the future land use was the one that I specifically And if we don't plan, we fail.
Perhaps I'm a little biased because of my planning background, but the future land use map drives most of the other plans, right? In other words, if we reduce density in one area or increase density in one area, that has a direct impact to our transportation master plan, our utility master plans, and on down the line. It impacts the ability of our fire and police to serve and their limited resources. So it's a domino effect, right?
How long has it been since that specific plan was updated? Was it at the beginning in 2012?
Well,
It's updated every other meeting.
yeah.
No, that's amended, that's different. We didn't plan for it.
I guess the last decent amendment was, 3 years ago? 3 years ago when we talked about the southwest
That was
quadrant?
before I got on, so 2 years ago?
Okay.
So I'm just saying, we should be really looking at this, since we're doing these combined workshops, which are great, we should be looking at this at least every other year, making sure that we're still consistent with the market and preparing for and taking a look at spots along the city that are dead and finding out why. Why is this still sitting here vacant after all these years? And saying, is this really the right spot for this specific land use? And then getting ahead of it and saying, we need to change this now so that someone will actually come in and be interested in doing that. Instead of waiting for a developer to come along, like she said, and saying, I want to do this, and we're like, oh, sure, blah, 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 let's go ahead and make this change. We're planning for it, so we're inviting the right kind of development to come in. And it should be happening more frequently than 3, 5, 7, 8 years. It should be happening at least every 2 years, because that's how quickly the trends are changing.
So flashing back to when this really first came to the forefront of my mind was when we were talking about one of the rezones out near 5600 West. I think it was about the time we were talking about the view out of 5600. And the comment was made that when the bulk of the plan was put out there, Mountain View Corridor hadn't yet been completed. We knew more or less where it was going to be, but it hadn't been done yet. And as we sat down and we looked at it, we could see kind of what the blocking was, where people had said, okay, well, this should go here. This will make a nice transition from commercial to residential, and this is how we can. But it didn't seem like it had really been reviewed after that went in, after some of the other changes. And that's where I really wanted to try and look, especially on the west side, to see what's out there now, what's coming. And then also with regard to infill, we've done some review for infill. It's been 6 years since we updated like the Redwood Road portion. There's been a little bit of conversation about the other parcel off of 62, kind of by the airport. And I think this ties in, and like you said, it does dovetail in with everything else. We also need to include economic development with this, because that can be a big driver. When people are looking to develop, do they want to jump through the hoops of having to get stuff rezoned? If we can more proactively say, this is what we see, this is where it is, and we'll lead with this, and then reach out to the property owner and say, this is what we're thinking. Maybe we can use this as a tool to help spur economic development as well. I'll go around with.
I'm with Kayleen, is that the future land use map needs to be updated. I think we need to pull in the general plan committee and start with them. By the way, that belongs to the city council now. And we need to get that appointed and get that going and start looking at that. I think that the message that we need to send is we have looked at the future land use map. We know what the city wants to look like. And so then when somebody comes in and says, we want to do something different, we say, no, we've updated this. This is what we want the city to look like. We're not going to change this often. And if we can stay on this every couple of years, like Chris suggests, which I think is a good idea. If we can update that every couple of years, then we're keeping track of the market. The market changes. I mean, here's the one that I remember the most, and this is the northeast corner of 78th and 56th. And we had that come before.
Whatever happened there?
But the northeast corner of 78th and 56th on the future land use map was low-density housing. And everybody knows that with the Smiths on the other corner, that that corner's not gonna be low-density housing anymore. And so Peterson comes in and wants to put the apartments or the senior housing on the backside and the IHC up front. And the neighbors go crazy because, well, this is on the map as low-density housing. Well, it's not gonna be low-density housing on that intersection anymore. I agree with Trish, the market has changed. And so I think Kayleen's right, we need to set a plan out for 5 years, what our vision of the city looks like, and update that every couple of years and look at what market changes are. And I think that's where we need to, and get in a routine habit of doing that. And if we get in a routine habit of doing that, then we don't have these shocks and surprises and everything else about, oh my gosh, we want to put a 20-story building in the middle of a pasture on 5490. I'm making that up, but we've had those kind of requests, and we have something similar. So I agree, that's where we need to go.
I think the other part of that, this is gonna be maybe the less fiscally responsible side of me saying this, but I talked to you about this at the APA conference and a couple other people. One of the biggest problems we have with any development is the whole concept of NIMBY, right? We're gonna appoint people who are residents of the city to come and talk about what they want in their city, and I think that's great, but they always don't want it in their backyard. We just talked about the people on the east side of 5490, right? We don't want it in our backyard. Do whatever you want, as long as it's not in my backyard, right? You said this at the very beginning because of your planning background. There's value in having certified planners who understand those market trends and what's coming down the road. We may be able to look and say, I can see even 5 years down, but a qualified planner is going to be able to see a little bit further down. I think we really need to be consulting with some kind of a firm as we plan this next step out, because we really have to take ownership of our land. It's becoming more and more of a premium. It's not as much as it was even 8 years ago. This is all filled in, right? We don't have as much as we did, and we have people asking for large chunks of it every single day. We need to be seriously considering how we do this. And it can't just be left up to a group of 5, 7, 10, however many citizens of the city to do this. None of us is qualified to do that. We know a little bit better, but none of us is qualified to do that without direction.
I agree very much with that. I'm curious, what we're talking about with the future land use map is really becoming much more proactive at a city level, with the intent to drive others and other organizations to the city's vision, rather than reacting and seeing UDOT come in and say, oh, well, no, that's going to be 5 lanes instead of 2. We've already gone in and said, that's going to be 5 lanes, and so we've planned for that. We've planned around it. We've shown what's going to be developed in that particular area. So one of the questions I had was, as we go through this, 2012 was the last major update with a couple of smaller plans that have been updated since. What usually triggers those smaller updates?
The developer's request, or not just one developer's request. Usually, or sometimes we'll get multiple requests from different developments, and the planning staff will notice a trend, and then we will, for example, the southwest corner of the city, that was being gobbled up really at a rapid rate with storage units, and so we're a little proactive in creating an ordinance. As far as land use map goes, that whenever we need it, like for example the southwest corridor, we created that EDA, Pioneer Technology EDA, and that facilitated at least that portion taking place. There have been other major updates through the years on the west side, but honestly, the east side has not been looked at for probably 15, 20 years.
Well, the other thing is that it's, as part of the future land use map and everything, it would give us a chance to go through and identify obsolete zones, west side of the park, that identify
Sorry,
some
the
of the...
microphone didn't catch up. What did you say?
to go through and identify obsolete zones or obsolete things that we need to catch up with that we haven't. We've got a couple of, I think Larry and I think you and I talked, there's a couple of onesie twosie weird zones out there that we need to clean up. I think that going through that and identifying those pieces of property, I semi-agree with Commissioner Quinney. Having somebody with a consulting background, a professional experience can help guide the discussions, but the 7 planning commissioners were appointed by the mayor for a reason, and the 7 council members were voted in by the people for a reason. And I am not going to, I'll say this right now, I'm not going to abdicate my responsibility by turning it over to a consultant and have him tell me what the map's going to look like. If we can get some input, that's great, but the ultimate people that are responsible for that decision are the ones that are sitting around the table here, and we've got to own up to that. And yes, we asked a committee to help with that input and the vision, but that's our political process. And
I'm not saying we take ourselves out. Don't read that in there. We need consultants to give us direction, but if we don't agree with it, we have that right and that responsibility.
You see where I'm going with that, is that it's the citizens of the city. Yes, we may need professional help. Wait, I know I need professional help, but
I think there's a couch upstairs.
Yeah, but you know where I'm going with that.
I think it's important to realize, from the short time I've been on the planning commission, what I have seen from city staff has been incredible. The level of detail and preparedness they bring to these types of meetings and with their jobs. And working in public service myself, I know the time commitment that requires. And you're often tasked between priority A or priority B in making a last minute decision. That said, and I don't want to step on toes or anything along that line, I think getting to a more proactive approach when it comes to these plans is going to be integral. And maybe rather than looking at others coming in to trigger an update by saying, well, a developer coming in saying we're looking at doing X, Y, or Z, I'd like to see a plan put in place where, whether it's with this group or in more work session type things or just at a staff level, going through the entire plan, each part of the plan from top to bottom, say every 5 years, where you say these sections 1 year, these sections the next year, these sections the following.
Larry?
So, a couple of good examples maybe to answer your question, Commissioner Allen. We see a lot there's 2 parcels of property, I think they're about 2 acres each, were part of the old Jordan Hills Villages plan. And they were commercial pieces, and I think they're about in the corner of 8400, and then a little bit up the road was an old detention. Well, there's developed absolutely no commercial interest in those properties whatsoever. We get a lot of calls on people wanting to do townhomes and things like that. We'll tell them, well, if you want to match the density of what's across the fence, then that's fine. But that was planned in 2001, and they thought, well, this would be a nice little neighborhood commercial. Never panned out for whatever reason. People have tried to put gas stations there, and they just said, no, it's the wrong place for this kind of use. And another example is the old property that the district owned on U-111 and right up the road from, I think, 8200 South, right across from Sunset Ridge Middle School. So they owned 50 acres and they purchased it in 1952, I think, or something like that. So that's a really, really long thinking people at that time. And they thought, well, this would be a big school property. Well, the school district didn't have any interest in building a high school there. And so they sold 40 acres of that off to the Boyer Company, who developed Oak Ridge Park, and Ivory Homes eventually purchased that from them to be the builder there. The same thing, we left 9-some acres right on the corner for an elementary school. Well, since the school district has said, well, we really would prefer a site west of U-111, because we see now that there's development going to go west of U-111. So school districts change their boundaries all the time, and you know, putting something there, you know, it's a good placeholder, but, you know, an old boss of mine said that we can't zone for oil wells. Just because you zone for it doesn't mean it's ever gonna come, you know? And so I think that a really good comprehensive look at the plan, a realistic plan on what's happening in the community. And I think we can protect the community with a lot of good design elements and connections and that type of thing, so.
I absolutely agree. I think what I'm hearing, maybe I'm mishearing entirely, but it feels like we're very reactive at a city level. And that's never going to go away. The vast majority of what we do is going to be reactive. I'd just love to see us get out in front of it and say, this is the city's vision, and then invite people to participate in that.
That said, I think there's a lot of places where the plan, the future land use map and the general plan do serve us well, but we just never hear about that. We only hear when there's something that's new, something that needs to change. I wonder if there's something that can be done to help maybe change the way things are reported back that kind of highlight, these are the plan, this is how the plan is working right. These are the areas of the plan that may need to be tweaked. I think staff does a very, very good job bringing up problems. One of the things, it's kind of interesting, going through the notes from the council retreat, one of the things that came up, I think 4 or 5 different people had this scribbled down, was the idea of celebrating successes. I think we are very much in the habit of only looking at things that aren't working, and we don't really look at the things that are, and then try to emulate those qualities elsewhere. So I think it feels like we're more reactive than we really are, and maybe there's ways we can address that perception with.
We are the reactive department, right? We're
Yeah.
the department of reactions.
But we need to change some of that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So
for
let's
sure.
look at the elements that are working right, bring that in and not be totally
Yeah,
dependent on
several
staff.
things get built and neighborhoods get developed and stuff that never comes to the city council because it's all happening within the zoning, within the land use, and it just goes through the administrative process and it gets done.
And maybe we can work on some of those exact things, is that when a developer or a home builder comes in and actually doesn't fight for the zoning and it goes in, that we get some sort of report that says, yeah, that this is where the general plan worked.
I think we might see a positive impact coming back even within the community, because this is also how a lot of our residents hear about what's going on. They're receiving the same things we are through these public meetings, through viewing them or attending. So if we're starting to celebrate accomplishments, maybe people are seeing that too, also changing that.
Thank you for bringing that up, because the staff, I'm not just planning staff, public works, police, fire, we do benefit from the council's vision every single day when we come to work and we answer those phones, when they have people come in front counter. We do have clarity. Now, we've got a new group here and we had the opportunity, it sounds like this year, to refresh. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to point out the fact that the development services staff, we're very, very busy right now. And you may not see that reflected specifically on your agendas, because only certain items hit the council and certain items hit the commission's agenda. But as we look at updating the future land use map this year, I'll have to talk with the mayor and Corbin and look at available resources. But the very real reality is that we may need council support with funding to pay for at least some consultant to help us move forward. So just planting that seed. Rob.
Scott, can I just throw a couple of things in that may be helpful? I hope it's helpful. Observation. The question came up is what would prompt a general plan revision or change? And one of the things that cities struggle with, and this city does, and other cities do too, is that sometimes change in the law by the legislature ought to be a reason. And we don't react to that like we should. And a lot of cities don't. And I know some of you may have heard more or less in the last few years is that the legislature has become much more proactive in forcing the hand of cities to be more proactive in addressing the true market conditions of what is the reality of development in a given city. And so one of the things that we should be doing as a city on a regular basis is looking at what changes have come in the law that we need to be adapting to. And take the ADU issue as an example. It's very important right now that the council and planning commission, in a timely way, address that issue, because there has been discussion in the last few sessions about the legislature preempting the ability of a city to say no to ADUs. And I don't like that. On the other hand, there's been some very good points raised about why cities ought to allow ADUs in some form and some fashion. So that's one reason to constantly look into the general plan. The other thing I just suggest to keep in mind when we're talking about revising the general plan, keep in mind that right now you already have two 600-acre proposals in front of you that are going to force you to make some pretty significant decisions now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what it does is it gives you maybe a point of reference in reality for at least now in the next few years as to what's going to be coming to you. In the context of maybe having somebody come in and help you, Scott, the timing issue, it very well may be useful for the planning staff to have some professional help, not to redo necessarily a lot of things, but to just think through what can happen in the future based on what opportunities are in front of you now. And I don't know what's in your minds, and I'm not pretending to know, but one thing that I would encourage you not to be thinking is that when you're talking about revising the general plan, that all of a sudden, for the next 9 or 10 or 12 months, all applications are going to be put on hold, or new applications are going to come in until you get this vision figured out. Because who knows what else may pop up that you may want to jump on and take advantage of something that just comes in that nobody's even thought about. And a couple of you have kind of alluded to that. Anyway.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is it all right, Chair, if we transition to the next item?
Please. 8 to 10 minutes turned into, let's say, 6:39.
So
it's 30 minutes for our
the perfect segue is we do want to be proactive, and that's why we want to take some time with this group to talk about a very progressive, proactive approach to land use planning. And Larry's going to talk about the PCFB. So
Scott, just
yeah.
while you're transitioning, because I've been a firm believer on this one. We dealt with, we started to deal with it, and then it kind of died, but we've got to fix it. And I think Rob will probably agree with it. Our sign ordinance has got to be near the top of that, because we know it's unconstitutional as all get out. We haven't enforced anything recently, but we've got to fix that.
It is not unconstitutional.
So on my silent note taking, signs, group homes, things that we need to address legally for legal reasons, you'll see that sooner rather than later.
Good.
Okay, so
John Austin, down Duncan.
I can't tell you how invaluable a dialogue like this is to staff, because we don't hear this often enough, and we'll operate in a vacuum and think, oh yeah, we're doing great. And well, the way the communication goes is I'll go and talk to, a planner will talk to me, I'll talk to Scott, he'll talk to Corbin, and then it just floats up the chain. But it's really good if we talk to the whole group that's planning the city, of what direction we should be going. And this is another tool in your tool belt. I think Council Member McConaughey brought that up a few weeks ago. And it's a form-based, it's a planned community form-based zone. We have a planned community zone already, but this will be a form-based zone. I have hard copies if anybody wants one. Angie will pass those out, whoever wants one. And so the overarching requirement.
Nice slide.
That's right.
Congrats.
And Ray
That was Corona Arch. by the way.
Corona Arch, I was gonna say Ray was the only one that could tell us what that is. but the mayor heard it. And so the overarching requirement of any ordinance is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the city. It's never the intent of a zoning ordinance to go beyond that. If it's not protecting the health and safety, then we don't want to deal with it. So what we're talking about tonight is the PCFB zone. By and large, West Jordan has been planned and developed by conventional zoning, Euclidean zoning they call it, because of a famous court case in the early 1900s. There's nothing wrong with that type of zoning. So I'm not here to bag on conventional zoning, because after all, 7/8 of our city is that. It's the R110, R18, R112, SC3 zones. It's zone specific, and what it is it talks about a parcel of property, and you zone it for a certain use. Okay, and then you end up with a building on the lot, and with the zoning ordinance, you enforce setbacks, height requirements, that type of thing, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so some of the pros and cons of the conventional zoning is it prevents the mixing of incompatible uses, such as erotic dance clubs and schools. I don't think those two go together, but who knows? Gives control over land use, appearance, and quality of life.
What kind of school are we talking about? Talking about, PE in school.
It's open to the imagination, I suppose. And so it's predictable. The lot sizes, housing type, setbacks, road layout design. It's very predictable. And the last one, it's easy. A lot of smaller communities or communities just starting out, a conventional zoning is the right tool because they don't have a lot of staff. And it's easy to learn and it's easy to implement. Some of the cons of it is it discourages development in some locations. Out and out, as we talked about the NIMBYism issue, somebody doesn't want townhomes next to their single-family lot. So it tends to do that. It increases the cost of new housing. Now, how does it do that? It's because usually lots are larger, there's a greater separation between the dwelling units. It results in not only higher infrastructure costs that have to be put in, because you put in a lot more miles of road, a lot more miles of pipes, but it also increases the cost of the lot, okay, because they generally are bigger. And a lot of the lot is used for yard space. What?
A lot of the
A lot of the lot. There you go. Thank you, Mayor. Because when I talk, I just.
That's good, I like it.
And so often it can often result in non-conforming uses, non-conforming lots and structures. The example was brought up today across the street because that zone was put in place 20 years ago. Well, all those buildings that are over there right now are all non-conforming. So they can't add on to them, they can't expand. And so it really becomes a problem for somebody who has sunk roots or a lot of money in that location. It encourages sprawl. So what does that mean? You build a road, you build houses. That's what I was taught in school. The two things you put in to encourage development are a road and a sewer line. That's what they did in Eagle Mountain. Way out in the middle of Cedar Valley where I used to go shoot guns, put a road and a sewer and a water line. Magically they have housing development. Nowhere close to anything, but it encourages sprawl. It's less clustered and dense, so less revenue collected per linear foot of street. Corbin, you might be able to help us with that one if you want to chime in. I don't know.
I like that. I was looking over this and thought, Larry, people are gonna think I paid you to say that last bullet point. The tax base per linear foot of street is the biggest indicator of the future financial health of the city.
Say that again.
In my opinion, tax base per linear foot of street frontage is the biggest indicator of the future financial sustainability of the city.
And I agree.
And this is a portion of our city. I took an area, it's around 90th South. This is Kelvin Green's favorite zone, it's a planned community zone.
That PC zone
Yeah.
at 90th and Redwood, my favorite community, by the way.
And so, in the early 90s, late 80s, this was an Albertsons and a Shopco. Typical large, big box shopping center. It was a great addition to West Jordan. That's the kind of stuff we liked. But it all addressed,
I hear it's an RV park now.
I heard that, but I saw them at Reams today. So.
Rames, Kmart.
And so,
Thanksgiving.
you know, and so what they did is they put all
Those ADUs.
of the desirable features, the storefronts facing the parking lot. None of, maybe this faces the street a little bit, but they face the parking lot. And so when shopping centers start to get tight on money, they do this kind of thing. They start to develop the perimeter of the shopping center because it's right out on the street and it's high visible. Well, what it does is you have a large anchor tenant leave like Albertsons. You know, a business took over that, but it is not an Albertsons. So you're left with this facing the parking lot, and this is what you're looking at the back. You know, this is the Albertsons, backside of Albertsons. The most interesting thing back here to me is the loading dock. You know, what's going on there? And this is the back of the movie theater. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way things happen because that was the development pattern at the time. And if we look at a neighborhood, and this is 9400 South, 90th South, basically Redwood on up to 22, you see how the zoning is segregated uses perfectly. You have a high-density apartment complex here, single family in West Jordan, senior housing right here, some other four-packs right here as it transitions into more single family here, more single family, and then the few mansions that we have in West Jordan here in that location. And if you notice, the institutional uses, the church, offices, banks are all segregated to the outside of the property along the streets. That's what zoning does, and it is predictable, like I said, and a lot of people like that. So I want to go back. So how do we deal with a situation like this? The city council says we hate those back of those ugly buildings. Can we do something about it? So what do you do?
Let's knock them out and put some windows in there.
We adopt design guidelines, okay? But is design guidelines, is putting all this features on the back of this really going to change it any? Is it going to bring people to the back of that building? No. It just costs people a lot of money. And so the two things I want to compare, is we already have a planned community zone, which I think is a great zone. And how does the planned community zone and the planned community form-based zone, how do they compare? Well, oops, I'm sorry, I pushed the wrong button. So the planned community zone requires a master development plan and a master development agreement. So does the form-based zone. The planned community requires one set of general design guidelines. And that's a huge step from an R110, R112 zone. We have no design guidelines, okay? The form-based, because it is based on design, this tends to be more based upon use. You have two sets of design guidelines. One is more general for the roads, landscaping, trails, but then you also have a second set that talks about the architecture. What's it going to look like? You know, and it's a little more fine grained. Nothing wrong with this zone. You know, it's very usable. The uses are segregated, which to a lot of people that want to live in this kind of community, that's great. Because they want to know they're living in a single family neighborhood. Okay, there's some people that is very important to. In a form-based zone, the uses are always inclusionary. You know, you have single family next to a duplex, another single family next to a 12-plex. You might have a barber shop in the middle of it. So it's really not, the uses aren't segregated. The density is determined by the land use map and approved by the city council. The density is determined by place type, and we'll get a little bit into place type here in a minute. The lot layout is based on requirements, setbacks, heights, minimum lot sizes, those things. And the lot layout in the form-based zone is based on design. How does this lot fit here? How does this lot fit here? And in the PC zone, bulk requirements are established. The bulk requirements are setbacks, lot coverage, that type of thing. And the bulk requirements in a form-based zone are based on design. So this is based on design. A huge amount of initial planning goes into a form-based zone. A large amount of planning goes into a planned community zone. But a lot of it goes on after the fact. Like I said, both of them are great tools that we have in this city, because I think that these two will be the future of West Jordan. And Calvin, what did the acreage requirement used to be in the planned community? It was 60 acres.
It was 50 or something.
50 something. We've ramped this up to a minimum of 200 acres. So I think a planned community, when it's much larger, you can get things like better connections, you get amenity packages, all that type of thing. The form-based, I'll talk about that in a second.
Larry, can you elaborate a little bit what based on design means?
Okay, so
You talking about like
based on design
design
is
of the house, like
the design of the
interiors?
house. How does that house fit on that lot? Say you have a hill right back of you. Well, you can use a Euclidean zone and say, well, you put an R110 lot here, but half of your lot's up this hill. But you don't meet the setbacks, so you have to get a variance from the setbacks. With a design base, you plan a very specific house under very specific parameters for that lot. So you can see that takes a lot more work at this time, because you're designing lot by lot at this point, and planning lot by lot. Stephen, is that correct? You're the expert on form-based here?
Well, you anticipate, you know what you're cooking, so when you start, if you're making chocolate chip cookies, you actually end up with that. So you plan with the end in mind, as opposed to having abstract requirements and you're not quite sure what you're going to get at the end of the day. So that's what the form base does. You settle on what the form is up front. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Not really, so with a form of what? You're using words that I've heard before, but I'm not familiar with them in this context.
Well,
So
we
when
would
you
look
say
at,
design-based or form-based, what does that mean?
it's at a number of scales. The form of the house, the form of the street, the form of the block, the form of the neighborhood. And all those forms yield what would be referred to as the place type. So if you're building a neighborhood has certain characteristics. If you're building a village center, it has certain characteristics. So that the form-based code, you sort of agree on the idea of what should a neighborhood be up front. You agree on the form of a village center up front, the form of the city up front, and then everything is building toward that agreed upon form. Does that make sense? So a form-based zone really requires that you agree on the form you're going to build, which recipe are you cooking. So it doesn't assume you know how to, let me see how to say that. It's very intentional. And every move, every incremental move is building a whole that is agreed on. That's the difference.
So, real quick, a lot of the council and the commission have seen this proposal, and Larry just has a few more slides after these that he's already gone through, but it would be helpful to be thinking about questions you have in regards to, like Councilmember Jacob just asked a fantastic question, and if you have questions right now, please feel free to fire away, but at the end, Larry's going to be asking some questions.
So my question is more the overall goal of this portion of the conversation. I want to make sure that staff has the insight and information that you need from us. So I guess as we're talking about this, we we've had some good conversations, so we understand the background of the benefits between the two, and it felt like this is the direction that we wanted to go, but there were some questions from staff as to how the council wants to proceed. I'm not sure what those questions are we should be asking, or what gaps you have that need to be filled in. So I'm kind of looking at staff as, honestly, I'm almost kind of wanting like a list of, here are the 10 questions that we need to answer, so we can bring something back to you, so we can start updating code. And as I'm watching kind of the background, that's in the back of my mind. If I knew how this would be applied to decision-making, that would be incredibly helpful for me.
Okay. And so, number one is the ordinance in place, because that's what establishes everything. But, I'll be thinking of questions you should be asking as I proceed on. So a form-based code is simply land development regulation that fosters predictable built results in a high-quality public realm by using physical form rather than separation of uses as an organizing principle for the code. So you see here that everything faces the street. There's design at the rear of the property. There's a mixture of uses, but nothing has its back turned on the public realm. And so it really is an organic type development that used to occur in a lot of our cities around.
Larry, if I could interrupt, to me, this prohibits NIMBYism. I mean, everything is in your backyard, so there is no option for nothing in my backyard.
And so what are the pros? The use always addresses the street. You don't, and we have a lot of this in West Jordan, there's a lot in South Jordan, Riverton, Sandy. Houses are on interior streets, and their backyards are on the collectors and arterials.
What was that last bullet point?
Where?
On the right side, bottom one?
These are the cons. It's going to go through this.
No, I'm just glad to see that, because that's one that everybody hit on last time.
Yeah.
Concerns with smaller roads and turning access. It's missing parking, but yeah, that bullet was one that I think everybody hit on.
Parking just kind of goes along those smaller roads, and they can cause problems.
That it also has positives. So,
Yeah, you don't have to tell the streets because you can't get down it.
See, that's
Did I hear that?
Not from the mayor, you didn't.
Right, gotta check.
So,
Sorry.
There's your Band-Aid right now, you can't get the card.
All right, sorry for the detour, please continue.
So it leads to creative development that considers natural features and strengths of the area, and it is interesting. One of the talks is that if you take a walk down the street, is it interesting? It's not really interesting when I'm in my neighborhood, other than I can eavesdrop on the neighbors. But, the architecture's not great, the front yards aren't great, so it's just not interesting. So form-based is always walkable, and it's connected. It's more clustered and dense. So here, Corbin, you have increased revenue per collection per linear foot of street. And it works very well in areas that have topography. Now, this city is advancing into the Oquirrh Mountains. We used up all the irrigated farm ground like what I grew up on that was relatively flat. All the dry farms being used up is relatively flat. Has a gentle slope, but not like the Oquirrhs. And why does it work well in topography? Because you can address the landform. You can design with the landform in mind. And the cons, it causes maintenance concerns because it's out of the norm. Well, what do you mean the street doesn't meet the standard that we've always used? Specific area residential density is higher because of the cluster development. That doesn't mean the overall density of the project is higher. It's just the specific areas, because you're trying to create something in these areas. And as Councilman McConaughey, I had to put that in there because that has been beaten over my head for the last 3 weeks. And so that is a concern.
Hey Larry, real quick. So these cons aren't always necessarily the case. It all comes down to the specific development, right? And so we're very cognizant of these concerns, and as developers use this PCFB, if it gets passed, we will make sure that we take careful attention to these cons to mitigate
Yeah.
that.
In a planned community zone, you have standards you've approved that, hey, build according to those standards. That's your control, the standards. In this type of development, you have a chance to look at it. Is there a way to make this work? And I say, yes, you can always make something work if you address the issues. It's just like we're talking about the general plan. What are the issues you need to address? This is a big issue that the council, Public Works, the fire department is very concerned about at this point. But we've had very productive meetings on this. How can we make this work? Okay, and so the purpose and intent, I'm not going to read all this, but I just want to throw out a few phrases from each line. First of all, the purpose and intent of the form-based is a planned community. It's high quality, creative development. I can't read my own thing. Mixture of uses, varied heights, distinct compact neighborhoods, distinct neighborhoods. The uses of retail housing meet or exceed the needs of the residents. It's a pedestrian environment. Your children can walk to school. And part of the on-street parking slows cars down. That's been a proven planning principle for decades now. It's varied architecture. It's interesting. It's active and walkable. It's connected. Everything's connected. You have small blocks. People can walk around the block, through the block, they can walk to the next block. I've told this story before, but I live on a big circle off 3200 West. And when my son was growing up, his friend lived 5 houses from us. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the circle ended. Wasn't connected, so to go to his friend's house, 5 houses away, we had to go out to 3200 West, go clear down to 7100 South, clear back. So it was almost a mile to get to his friend's house, when in reality his friend lived like a quarter of a mile away. It has a way of preserving distinctive geography. You know, you can cluster the development in the valleys or the flat spots, so you're not tearing the hillsides up. It's a balanced transportation system. Now, as we're developing out on the west side, we're hoping that someday that the state will develop some type of mass transit out in that area because it's sorely needed. But this is the type of stuff that gets their attention because it's out there and it's sustainable. You know, we look at, you know, how can we make this sustainable development? Does everything have to be to Kentucky Bluegrass? You know, can we make better use of our water? And the guiding principles, and there they are again. And staff will review every application to comply with these principles. You know, they're guiding. This is how we look at every application. Now I love this picture because this ordinance anticipates centers. Rather than individual lots and stuff on the exterior, it anticipates a center. And see, even the medieval people had it right.
Can I get a copy of that picture? Because I'd like to use it in my campaign literature and say, this is my vision for the future of West Jordan. And see how many people want to jump on board with that.
I just love this picture because it's in France somewhere, Doug. So you might have been there. I don't know.
So
You see
when
the
those houses were
churches.
built, were there a lot of cars?
No. I don't think we had a lot of cars in medieval days. They had a lot of cars. You know, bring out your dad, that type of thing. And so, one requirement is that at least 4, if somebody applies for this zone, they have to have at least 4 land use types. So this is a neighborhood, and this is a category that has single family, multifamily, office, commercial, but the density is lower. It's 6 units per acre. I love this picture because most of it was drawn by elementary children, I think 5th or 6th grade. And I think some of this other stuff was added in by the teacher, but this is their vision of the community. We'll have a house right next to the deli, another house right next to the community center, right next to the park, and then my friends live here. So that's what they envision. I can walk to all my, you know, that's what elementary children envision that a neighborhood should look like. older children. I think these were sophomores, so it's a neighborhood center. This category is designed as a transition area that blends single-family detached townhomes densities with neighborhood schools, churches, and other civic uses. You can see it was drawn by teenagers because look at all the roads they drew in here. And then look at the, the leisure activity and the shopping. And here's the house down here. So you see what's really important to people at different age groups. But this is a good example of a center. It's mixed where people can get what they want where they live. And then, oh my goodness, how did this get here? So look at Zach and so this is a village center.
My car's not that nice.
So
Neither is that.
This anticipates a higher intensity of use, with a mixture of all uses. And this one, of course, was developed by the Winnebago Chamber of Commerce because everything is a business. And, they have a couple of houses thrown in here. But I just think it's interesting examples of what people envision. They want their community to be, but very seldom in the suburbs do we have this kind of development. So there's three others, a town center. This is probably the most intense of all. You have Business Parkway. The primary land use should be office and commercial, and of course, you have open space. I didn't put pictures of open space in because everyone knows what it looks like and everybody knows what they like. So in this code, there's something the planners can't let go of, and that's use tables. For some reason, as planners, we love use tables. But you can see most uses are permitted. But what this does is it permits a very specific type of use, and ours is a code. If it's not permitted or conditional, then it's prohibited. So how did all this fit together? Well, first we have the ordinance. Then we have the master development plan and development agreement. So this is all dictated by the ordinance. The community concept plan and the subdivision and site plans. So who controls this? Well, the ordinance, of course, is controlled by the city council. That's your control. Whether you adopt this ordinance, whether you make this policy change, that's under your control. So the master development plan and master development agreement, the control, again, in a larger way, is the city council. You control what this community will look like. You have a lot of upfront planning dialogue with the developer. At this point, the community concept plan that lays out lots and where the actual centers that we talked about will be, that's city staff that will control that. And the subdivision and site plans, the control is the planning commission. But both of these, as you see I wrote, are based on the ordinance, the master development plan, the master development agreement, and input from all city departments. So it's just not Larry the planner giving this approval. It's the entire city, the staff, plus the planning commission. So the zone creation requirements, a minimum of 400 acres, large parcel property. Council has discretion for smaller areas. Master plan, development plan, and master development agreement are required. The city council has the discretion to grant or deny the zone change. Now, why would you do that? If you get a developer in here and his development plan that just is not hearing what you're saying, you don't have to approve this. You never have to approve a zone change. The city council is highly involved with the planning and development through the master development plan and master development agreement. This zone gives the planning commission and city council fine-grained control. And what I mean by that, the Euclidean zone, you pass the lot size and the setbacks. You don't even control where the roads go. You don't control how the lots are laid out. This gives you really fine-grained control, this ordinance, I should say. And so these are actually from the ordinance. The city council can disapprove this zone if they don't think the person has the financial capabilities to carry this out. There's not a lot of people that have the financial capabilities to carry out a 400 or 600 acre development. It's not being planned as an integrated use. All this guy's doing is putting a 60-acre subdivision here and a 40-acre, and he's like putting one road there, but he's not putting trails, it's not connected in any way. It's not plan as shown on the master development plan will accomplish the purpose of the article, the intent and purpose of the article. The applicant fails to provide a phasing plan. Because, you know, the one concern we always hear is, well, we get all the houses up front, we get the amenities on phase 10 that comes 15 years down the line. That is something that needs to be addressed right up front. How are these amenities going to be phased in? Scott? Okay.
We're just running short. I want to make sure the council and the commission have a chance to weigh in and ask their questions. The intent is to end the meeting at 8 or, yeah, so.
Okay. Some of these things I've already talked about. So master development plan does all that. What does the master development agreement do? It establishes how it will all happen. Is that true, Duncan?
Yes.
Yeah, because the rest of it, design is, how's it gonna happen? That's the master development agreement. So this is, what I wanna say is the master development agreement leads to the creation of the master design guidelines and architectural guidelines. Who's the control? Council here, and then the architectural guidelines are developed by the developer, as approved by the zoning administrator, based on everything that's in the ordinance and the master development plan. This is a quick rundown how it would occur. The form-based ordinance will be passed, they establish a development area, there's approved master development plans and master development agreement. You can see the control is the council, master design guideline, community concept plan is approved by staff. Architectural guidelines created by the developer and approved by the zoning administrator. Architecture administered by the developer. And that means up front they have to give me a set of guidelines that they will follow themselves. They will do the architectural control. We don't have the staff to do this. And so we're requiring them to do that. But we still control issuing a building permit. That's where our control comes. And so this really doesn't take any control away from you. It actually gives you more, in my opinion. This is the last slide. I believe it's the type of zoning of the future. It's essential as the city expands into the areas of topography. The essential land use decisions are made by the commission and council early in the process. That means connections, densities, roads, designs, amenities. High level of detail established at entitlement. You don't get that with most zone changes for a Euclidean zone. It sets up a process with parameters. It means staff cannot go beyond these parameters as the council has set up. Efficiency of utilities by promoting cluster development, more tax revenue collected per linear foot. Technical decisions are made by staff. Again, pipe, sewer, water, road layout, that type of thing. And it ultimately gives more control. Questions, comment, anything on this?
So I have a question. I'm just looking through the ordinance and seeing the permitted use table, and there's a whole lot of Ps on there. Like everything's permitted, basically. How much of those uses would be defined in like a master development agreement or development plan?
Probably with the use table, we would fall back to the zoning ordinance that this ordinance is part of for the definition of those uses.
Those should already be defined in codified.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is everything's permitted. So when you come to me with, you want a PCFB zone, and you want it for this 600 acres, how do I know what's gonna end up there? Whether it's gonna be an indoor recreation center or an outdoor recreation center, a restaurant general or a restaurant fast food. Are those uses, they're all permitted. So what I'm saying is what control is there in the development agreement or development plan over which specific uses will be permitted in this specific
That is where
PCFB?
the community concept plan, the more fine-grained plan, would address that. And so that would be more of a staff determination. You would give that type of control to staff at that point, because they'd be actually looking at the design of the street. What fits here, what fits there. you don't have time to be doing that because it would take up the majority of your time if you're having to look at phase one of a development. Well, I don't think this goes here because you guys have a lot of other things to do. The control is you're establishing guidelines for how these things look in the development and how they fit in the development.
So for example, it would be up to staff to decide if a brew pub goes in or a senior home.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be in the development agreement that the council has control
No,
of.
those uses would be in the development agreement. Say those uses in the ordinance and master development plan are what is allowed. You don't see any there, you don't see any really extreme uses, you don't see any industrial uses or auto body shops or that type of thing, because we don't want that in this zone.
No, but it is a wide variety of
It is.
uses, so.
But they're mostly uses that have been found over the years to be compatible with one another or compatible in a location. Where the staff's not gonna allow a brew pub to go next to
Right.
a single family.
This staff
school.
may not, but maybe the next staff will. I'm always leery when somebody says, well, yeah, that would technically be allowed, but we would never do that. Hold the phone, because Mr. Developer back here on the back row is gonna come to you and say, well, that's technically allowed. So,
Zach's got a good point, and I love this concept, I love it. My concern is there are developers who've established a goodwill, that they're creating a community. We're not making chocolate chip cookies, we're making a dessert counter. And that's really the difference here. And I fear a developer coming in and trying to take advantage of what we're offering here, which is a pretty open-ended development opportunity. And a developer that hasn't got our interests in mind would do just what you said. Here's my high-density housing and the rest just doesn't happen. So I have a concern about how we make sure, and this is to your question, how do we make sure this is a development that really is a good one? And you have to base it upon how willing the developer is to come in and create that place setting that we see, as opposed to somebody who just wants to come in and build houses. That's a big concern of mine.
And what you could require, you can require this of the developer, because I want to see the design for phase one redevelopment. Perfectly within your,
percentages and things.
perfectly within your approval.
This would also be included in the, I mean, the master development this is where I see the process going, is that, and I'm gonna throw Daybreak under the bus. When they come in, they've got a fairly detailed concept plan laid out. And you know what the area is going to look like. And if somebody's building, and I'm going to have to say I'm a little trustful. I understand where Councilmember Jacobs coming from. But if they're going to try to be selling a whole ton of, if they're going to be trying to sell homes, they've got to make the community make sense to sell homes. Or they're not going to sell. You know, if you've got 3 brew pubs next to 6 single interspersed between all the single family homes,
and the daycare.
What's that?
And the daycare.
And the daycare right next to the brew pub. It's probably not going to make sense, and somebody's going to say, "What were they smoking?" So, I think that maybe we do need to look at that very specific thing, and maybe I'm just throwing this out, but maybe part of that community concept plan has got to be presented as part of the master development agreement.
Yes, community concept plan.
That, you know, or at least so that we have an idea of the layout and those kind of things, so that may alleviate part of your fear.
Maybe some of it, but what I'm saying is, take the Daybreak Village Center that we've seen a concept of. They say, well, here we imagine it would be something like a bike rental place or a small shop in this little town center here for use for the trails and the lakes and things that are going to be there, and this is going to be a little equipment rental shop, and that's going to be great. But in 4 years, we haven't had any interest in that, but hey, we've got a tavern who wants to come in here. Well, there's a tavern is a permitted use in this zone. So a tavern, let's just say a bar. Lucky 13 wants to open their new one in the middle of Daybreak.
Yeah, bring it.
The houses are already in, oh, I know, I've been burgers for days. But, you know what I mean, the houses are already in, the residents are already there thinking that, okay, when we come here in this village center, it's gonna be my bike rental shop.
But I'm gonna throw this out. In any planned community, take this out of the form-based concept, in any planned community, you've got the exact same problem. In any neighborhood, you've got the same problem. I built next to, I'll give you my neighborhood. I built next to a 7-Eleven, and 8 years later, it turns out to be an auto dealership on a corner because the 7-Eleven failed. We don't, if it's zoned commercial, we say what kind of permitted uses are in it, and we don't, and so, if we don't like a permitted use, then we probably ought to take that out of the use table.
Right.
That's probably the discussion is, are there any of these things that we don't want in there, or you restrict them to a certain, like the village center versus something else?
Right.
But you can't, but knowing the fact that commercial is commercial, we're not gonna be able to control what commercial development goes into that building.
But we're also not controlling commercial, we're calling it plan-based community form-based. We're not even saying this is the commercial spot.
Well, but you are.
But it has
We're in the master
you are.
It
development.
has to fit the fabric of the development. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to put,
Right.
say Calvin's
Fit can be
house
in the eye
is
of
in
the
the planned
beholder.
community. It doesn't make any sense to put a brew pub next to his home. Where you put it is where everything's going on. You know, it's next to the,
So what
there's
I-
nothing going on in Calvin's
What
house.
I'm thinking is, some of these uses, I would rather see as a conditional use rather than a permitted use.
Okay.
And that way you can mitigate some things if there are concerns, because maybe there are concerns that we don't foresee now, but in 2 years when, you know, this development's in progress and there's some people already living there and something changes, we think, well, that's permitted, but maybe it shouldn't be, maybe it should be conditional. Maybe there are some mitigating circumstances we need to place on that use. Like placing it in only specific areas of a community or whatever it might be. So that's just what I'm thinking is I would take probably 4 or 5 or 6 of these permitted uses and make them conditional.
To me, it seems more like should go through that list and look at all the Ps and say, this is now restricted in this space, right? Let's not do them as conditional uses, because then we're gonna have dozens of more hearings that we don't need to bother having. More importantly, that becomes a little bit, in my mind, discriminatory, say, well, we'll allow a bike shop here, but we're not going to allow a bar here. They're both commercial uses, they're both retailers, they're selling directly to the public, right? So why can we have one but not the other? We can't say, I don't think we can control them under government, but we could say, look, this is a specific area, we can't let this kind of a business in here, but we can't do it as conditional, because then we're becoming
We do it
discriminatory.
all the time,
Yeah, but it's not
all
good.
the time.
It's not a good practice.
It's not been a good practice. I agree with that.
It depends on how libertarian you're leaning on getting it.
Just call me Ron Swanson.
But, you know, what you're missing is a community concept, because that will be approved, you know, where uses would be appropriate, whether or not appropriate.
That's why I let off with asking,
I think the bigger concern there, sorry, the bigger concern is if they can't fill the bike shop, that they don't come back and say, we want to turn this into a townhome or a duplex or a residential space, right?
No.
That's what we want to avoid.
No,
We don't want to have
we
an
have
extended stay coming back at us later down the road to say, I just couldn't do this, so we're going to do an extended stay. That's what we're trying to
No,
avoid.
because in the master development agreement, you establish the square footage of
But,
commercial.
that's what I'm saying, I think you're right, I'm just saying for Zach, that for me, that's what we're looking at, is we're trying to avoid the change of use, not the commercial versus commercial.
Please enlighten us.
No, I just want to clarify one thing. This is something you all got to debate. To accomplish what Chris is, or what Zach's suggesting, conditional use would not be the mechanism, because a conditional use would have to go through the Euclidean zoning process and go back to the city council, and that is completely contrary to the whole idea of the form-based code. So if that is where you want to go, there's another mechanism. Generally, what would happen, if you've got specific uses you don't want in a given application, that's what you limit by the development agreement. But then again, think every time that you begin to constrict what those are, you're constricting the opportunity of the developer to respond to the market. And it's a tough balance to me. Just kind of keep that in mind as you talk through this concept.
That statement can apply to all zoning.
It can.
Because all zoning is restricting the rights of the developer to respond to.
Of course it is.
I mean, that's what zoning is.
It's discriminatory, it's taking people's rights away, it does.
Hey,
That's
by
all.
the way, you don't have a
Houston
liquor
doesn't have
store as a permitted use at all.
Do you want one?
Yes.
Yes.
Why not?
Does
It's
Utah-
commercial,
Does
it's
the state of
selling-
Utah
No,
want to
I-
build one there?
Let's not limit
We
ourselves
don't
to.
know if they want one there.
I mean, you can't have a
But
liquor store,
I have
maybe
that written down to ask you guys, why is liquor store not on here?
They can put it in there.
I think it should, I think it should.
The reason why is you can't because of the housing and stuff.
600 feet.
The state housing or the liquor laws don't permit that, but, I mean, could you?
We could
Should
add-
you?
We could add a whole bunch to this. We really could.
Well, to Rob's point though, so should this use table be in here at all? Because there is a use table in this.
Can I say?
love use table.
Yeah, I love use tables. Can I say one thing?
It's got Ps and it's got Cs and it's got ACs on it.
In a pure form-based zone, you wouldn't have any use table at all. Everything would be allowed.
And then you control it with the
You
development
control-
agreements.
yes. Say we don't want any factories, don't want any strip clubs, we don't want.
Right, especially next to the school, we talked about
But
that.
then your development agreement becomes massive. So, I don't know, it's just, they're all good comments and we'll consider them.
So we've only got about 2.5 minutes left, and in that last 2.5 minutes left, I'd like to know, what are the next steps? And do you, or what do you still need from us to take
Well,
those next steps?
Does the council need further discussion on this? I hear there's some concerns. If I take I hope you've been writing down the concerns, somebody has, because I don't remember. If I take a shot at and finesse that into the ordinance and send it to the council, I don't know if you want to have another work meeting or if you just want me to bring it to the council meeting as a public hearing.
What I think we probably want to do, I don't think it's ready for public hearing yet. I would suggest going through and where there's questions that might sound some discretion, if you can highlight those, and then we can add this as one of our work session items to kind of go through
So
and
Chair,
resolve some of those.
if we have, Chair and Mayor, if we, like I went through that and I've got a lot of different questions, do you want me to call someone?
Just, can you call me?
I would suggest if anybody has questions, provide them to Larry so that he can come and present those questions to the entire council so that everybody can hear the same answers. Or if it's a question for us to provide them, we can all have the opportunity to weigh in.
I like what we've done in the past a little bit, when you've emailed questions to staff, and the staff responds to everybody, just says, here's the questions that were asked, here's the answers that we have. I like having that asynchronous email, just because then I can review it and go through it.
So I guess there's two kinds of questions. One, if it's a question asking additional information, yeah, I'd like to see it just go to staff and then us get the information back. If it's questions that we need to answer, like, do we want to include liquor store in the list?
Right.
Then that's going to be one of the ones
That's
that
not
comes back to
necessarily
us
a
in the
question
work
for
session.
staff, that's a
So,
question for us,
so
yeah.
what I need as a staff is overall, what do you think of the tool that has been presented?
I think everybody's on the same page that this is definitely going the right direction. We need to refine it and would like to
I think
get it going.
I think it ties back to our original question about the future land use map. This takes developer, their feedback, what they want to do, and it gives them flexibility. It creates safe haven for us because we know what's going to happen in that area. I mean, West Jordan is being developed piecemeal. We've got everything on Red Road that we don't want, some things that we do. This just creates a remedy to the future land use map for those big chunks.
A specific time you want this to come back?
We'll talk more
Wednesday?
detail. Okay.
But I will say, I think we're behind the power curve, because this was originally on an agenda in November, and we're 3 months behind the power curve, and it's causing some problems, probably causing some problems with the Woods Ranch, so I think that we need to
That's
be
why we're
very
bringing it up
aggressive
now.
on that.
That's why we brought it up here in this forum with everybody in the hopes that if there were questions for both groups, save time from having to do one week, the other week, have us all here.
Okay.
We are at time,
Okay,
so
thank you.
with that, thank you very much. I would entertain a motion to, it's a city council meeting technically, so it's got to come from the city council.
So I'm going to make a motion that we move to go to closed session to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, or strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation. And adjourn from there with the planning commission being able to adjourn right now.
All right, so motion from Councilmember Green, second from Councilmember Whitlock. Just to be abundantly clear, this is a city council meeting, it's not a planning commission meeting. So the planning commission is not part of the closed session. That is, the planning commission was invited to the open session, not to close. That close would just be city council.
Want to take roll call?
Okay, roll call.
Councilmember Pat.
Yes.
Councilmember Worthing.
Absent.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Lamb.
Sure.
Councilmember McConaughey.
Aye.
Councilmember Whitlock.
Yes.
Councilmember Green.
Yes.
Vote passes 6 in favor.
It wasn't legal, but yes.
I think these Which one?
Wi-Fi, so she's